We'll get started. Thank you all so much for joining us today to talk about our Digital Good Index. You'll be hearing from myself. I'm Dr. Goddard, the Engagement and Impact Specialist for the Digital Good Network, and Dr. Kim Snooks is the PhD, the postdoctoral researcher working on the Digital Good Index for us here at the University of Sheffield as well. I'm going to be doing a Chris Whitty next slide, please, today. So Kim, if I could have the next slide. So yes, we're here today to talk about the Digital Good Index, which builds on a whole body of work from the ESRC Digital Good Network. Most it builds on this discussion paper from March 2025, which you may have seen, which is entitled "Evaluating the Societal Outcomes of Digital Technologies, Building Blocks and Reflexive Questions." So in that paper, we really dug into the concept of reflexive questions to ask and interrogate digital technologies, as well as asking questions about how and whether it's possible to evaluate digital technologies. And that's the real root of the work that we've been doing on the Digital Good Index over the last year and a bit since then. So the team for the Digital Good Index is myself, Kim Snooks, as I mentioned, and then Dr. Dan Richards, who's a design researcher at Lancaster University, and also Helen Kennedy, who is the director of the Digital Good Network. And we also have with us we're very well guided by our excellent steering group, from which we get real input and perceptions from people working in business, in the third sector, in cultural organisations about how the Digital Good Index might end up working in practice. And we're so grateful to them for the time that they spend advising us. And that is led and chaired by Professor Gina Neff, who's also on our management team, who's able to provide that real concrete experience of how the Digital Good Index might be used as a vehicle for people to engage with questions about what a good digital society looks like. So what is the Digital Good Index that I'm talking about? It's developed by the Digital Good Network, and it's a set of tools to evaluate whether digital technologies have good societal outcomes. So the real question here is about evaluation. It's about digital technologies and the potential societal outcomes they have. We know that not all digital technologies have good societal outcomes. In fact, even very well-intentioned digital technologies can have negative societal outcomes. So what we feel people lack is the ability to have a research-based way to evaluate digital technologies from the lens of the values and societal outcomes that they have. So it builds on digital society research from across the over 70 projects that we funded in the Digital Good Network, but also on other research from across the field of the digital society research and from existing guidance. So that's the sort of toolkits and guidance that have been developed by different organisations in the private sector, in the public sector, in the third sector, which help and show people how to develop better digital technologies. Very importantly, and at the heart of the DGI, is that it's values-based. We found that to procure and develop and deploy digital technologies in ways that have good societal outcomes, we need to make sure the right values underpin them. So the Digital Good Index as a package is a way to make sure that the right values are underpinning digital technologies, allowing people a moment to interrogate those values and also make and take actions based on the values underpinning their technologies. So it's a real question about why are values important for evaluation of digital technologies. We know there are lots of ways to evaluate digital technologies in terms of the kind of money they're making, how effectively they're working, but what we're seeking to contribute is this values-based evaluation. We define values as the core beliefs and principles that guide how to make decisions and to act. They're a compass shaping what we might consider right and important. And Kim will talk a bit about the Digital Good Builder work that we've been doing, but a bit of a spoiler alert to that is that people really relate to this concept of values and enjoy interrogating the values that are under what they're developing, designing and deploying. Values can be seen as priorities, so what matters most to people, standards, what's good and fair and acceptable, and motivators driving their action. They're the foundation for ethics. Ethical practices build upon values, about questions about what matters. And all of the work that you're doing on any digital technology is underpinned by values. There are some examples of values here. So fairness, accountability, transparency, equity, inclusion, accessibility, responsibility. They're all things that we might value in a good digital society. And I should say that we'll be having a Q&A session. So we'll give a short talk, Kim and I. We'll be having a Q&A session, and we'd love to hear from you in the Q&A session about some of these questions, for example, about this values-based framing. It'll be really interesting to hear what people think about it. So we found through the co-design work that we've been doing that Kim will talk about that values vary, that they depend on context, stakeholders involved, and other factors. They depend on your personal values, your organizational values, the values perhaps driving the requirement to develop a specific digital technology. And we're arguing that we need a clear way to talk about values across different actors, technologies, and contexts. So there's a lack of common language to talk about the values that drive digital technology. I think there's a lack of focus on the values that are driving the development of digital technologies. And what we're trying to do is really give a set of tools for people and practitioners to be able to bring that to the fore. So as it says here, we need to make visible, we need to make visible the values that will result in good societal outcomes. So what are the values that we've identified through digital society research? And these are the main things that we use in structuring our deliberations about digital technologies. So I'll run through these. The first one is involving stakeholders. So in a good digital society, people who are minoritized or disadvantaged are listened to in views are listened to in how technologies are evaluated, designed, developed, and deployed. Good digital technologies use participatory co-design methods in engaging with people in all stages, again, from evaluation all the way through to deployment. Good digital technologies take action towards equality. They take action towards collective well-being. So these are questions of sort of mental well-being, physical well-being, anything that's to do with people's collective happiness. Taking action towards minimizing environmental impacts. And this has been a really interesting one. If anyone has any questions about that, I think we'd love to discuss it because there's a lot of tensions at the moment, I think, about the environmental impacts of digital technologies. One about ethical data practices. So good digital technologies have ethical data practices. And through the work we're doing, we're finding that people have different understandings about what that means, how different understandings of how important that might be to themselves and to their users, which is really interesting to see. And we provide a set of guidance and recommendations about how to deliver ethical data practices. Good digital technologies consider the values of those involved in developing the digital technology. For example, if you're procuring a digital technology, what are the values of the people who will be delivering the service for you? They prepare for future uses. And so this really conceptualized the idea that well-intentioned digital technologies can do harm. What can you think about how your digital technology might perhaps be co-opted in the future, could be used for greenwashing? You know, how are people in good digital technologies will be people developing good digital technologies will be mindful about how their the potential future uses of their technologies. Good digital technologies will minimize negative impacts on people's jobs. And we've seen in the co-design work that we've been doing, you know, this whole tension bit playing out about meaningful work and potential, you know, job impacts. And good digital technologies ensure meaningful transparency, communication, and explanation. So that's to people who are using them, perhaps unintended users, to members of staff who are being expected to deliver and deploy them. So that's a whole strain of work about how you communicate the digital technology. So we've landed on these 10 values, and I'd really love to hear from you during the Q&A session about what you think about these. They're real sort of the guiding principles of the work that we've been doing. So if we look at the components of the Digital Good Index, so what is this thing, the Digital Good Index? What is it in practice that we're developing? And it's a real sort of suite of tools. The first is the Digital Good Builder, which Kim will talk about, which is a tool for people in industry, in policy organizations, anyone developing, deploying, or procuring a digital technology. So if you think about that, that's anyone, you know, coming up with a digital technology themselves, so tech developers, anyone who's perhaps in a local council procuring a new technological service, and anyone delivering, yeah, deploying. So that's where you sort of can buy in a service. And so you might think about, okay, I'm rolling out an AI assistant to my staff. What are the values based implications behind that? The second is that we found that people don't really have the terms and words to think about a good digital society. So we want to develop a glossary and perhaps a card deck where people can have an interactive workshop session around that. A database of existing guidance and indices, which I think we'll come back to, and also case studies of the digital good, which we'll come back to as well. Right, I'll hand over to Kim, who'll talk about the builder.
Thanks, Dee. So, as Dee pointed out, I'm going to talk about the digital good builder, and then I'm going to move on to talk about each element of the digital good index. So the builder is a values-based tool, as we've been discussing, to help evaluate whether a specific technology has positive outcomes for people, society, and the planet. So we intend for this to be used across the development lifecycle, so for people procuring, deploying, or developing a new digital technology. So we're currently developing this tool, and we're in the development phase with various different partners, with the hopes that a web tool will then be available for people to start using from autumn. So the digital good builder will go through a few different steps. So first, it will help you identify your values that are underpinning your digital technology. So this might be in a specific technology project or more widely across your organization. And then you'll go through a set of different digital good values, and through this consider the like kind of implications, the challenges, the benefits your technology might have for a good digital society. And then from these two things, you will then review this thing that we're calling MAPS, which is a manifesto, action plan, and score, pointing you towards existing guidance that already exists and identifying different actions that you'll take from what you've identified across the process. And we intend for this to be something that people return to regularly to ensure that there are good societal outcomes for your technology project. By constantly reviewing and deciding whether these values need to be changed or altered, whether there's things that you haven't considered through looking at the different good digital society values that we outlined earlier on, and different things like that. So what we've been doing is a series of co-design workshops. And the purpose of this is to understand what the digital good builder is before it becomes a digital tool. And then we can understand what works, what doesn't work. And so we're doing this with different workers, different target users within different contexts. So understanding what they find good within their context and how this might differ between different partners that we work with. And so one of the things we've been experimenting with is this a thing that we're calling MAPS, the Manifesto, Action Plan, and Scores. And so one of these things is the traffic light RAG rating system. So intended to take action, revisit, and see changes over time. So as you're going through these various different digital good society measures, seeing what where you are at one stage in the process, and the idea being that over time you'll identify things that you haven't yet looked at or haven't yet thought about, and then the idea that you move towards hopefully getting to green by the end of the process. So this is calculated through scoring. So actions that have been completed already in relation to your digital technology, and also considering how important those are within your project. And as we've been going through this process, we've realised that importance is not the correct term to use. Importance kind of implies that some of these digital good society values aren't important at all, which is not the case. It's just everything can't be important at one moment in time, and or might not be important at that moment in time, but it doesn't mean it isn't important at all to consider. And so we're shifting towards this term of people's priorities within the project to reflect that kind of language shift as part of it. And so from this score, these would be mapped against the different values that they'd taken. Um, the different values, the digital society values, they would throughout the process create a score, and then those scores would get mapped through this calculation onto this kind of graph so that they can see what values they might have worked towards more and ones that they've worked towards less, and identify these areas that they haven't worked on to think about the next steps within the process as they're developing or procuring or deploying a technology. So what have we learned so far? We've learned that people really enjoyed doing this process. They welcome the like socio-technical assurance and evaluation. Um, and what we found through doing this process in person with expert facilitators is that it works better if it is facilitated by someone with the relevant knowledge and expertise to ask additional questions and prompt further and things like that. But it could also be self-serve online so that anyone can use it, as requiring a facilitator will not necessarily make the tool possible for everyone. And therefore, we need to make alternative formats available so that this can work for anyone that needs to use it, but provide support and documentation on how to use it. And so we're thinking through the different ways that we can create this kind of documentation so that people could use it online without the need of a facilitator, even though that is how we feel that we'd advocate for it to be used at this time. And then also that it needs to focus more on organizational context. So on what users can actually do to make this change happen. So within different organizations, there's different structures, processes, and dynamics that might mean that people feel that they are not responsible or not able to make certain changes within an organization. So thinking practically what they can do in order to progress the technology towards a good digital society, rather than things that might be completely out of their control. And it needs to be clearer what values are being considered. So whether this is somebody's own personal individual values, whether this is values related to the technology project that they're developing, or whether it's wider organizational values that might already exist and be in place. And also considering how those might conflict with each other. So organizational values might not necessarily align with people's individual values, and how does that play out when discussing these within a team and through using the digital good builder. And we also need to embed accountability. So after completing the process, what happens next? Once they've created this set of actions that they can use to do some next steps, what different processes can we put in place to make sure that these steps are being followed up, like putting automating calendar alerts that they have meetings that they can discuss this in the future and things like that. And I'd be interested if anybody has some thoughts around this in the Q&A section. So the scoring helps identify areas for discussion, as we've said, but some people might want this, but it only tells part of the story. So some priorities within a project might not necessarily capture loads of different things to consider that might actually be really important to include within the project. So we're having discussions about how the scoring works and thinking about whether it is these things like priorities and whether that's better than importance, which can imply that some things aren't important, which was not the intention with that language. So there's some common themes that have been emerging that people have said they're going to do differently as a result of going through this code design process using the digital good builder, so that they will review these different roles within a project and organizational dynamics to understand how these might conflict, the different ways that a technology is developed or procured or deployed. They will include more consultation and using participatory approaches to collect a diversity of perspectives from users. So this linked more with like the first two measures around discussing participation and involving stakeholders and thinking through how they will do that more or prioritize that more within their project. And then specifically related to projects that involve AI. Quite a few of the projects um, like the partners that we've worked with, have used AI as their technology, and so they're assessing the impact of AI. They will work to reduce additional computational and environmental impacts, which specifically came up through these conversations about minimizing environmental impacts. So the second tool that we're developing, as Dee explained, is this glossary. And this is to help equip stakeholders with necessary vocabulary to have conversations about the digital good, to help inform their evaluation, and to work towards the digital good. So when people are discussing different concepts or characteristics that they would associate with the digital good, it becomes clear that the digital good isn't a universal concept. It's understood differently by different people, and the terms within this are equally as complex. Some people might say it means one thing, some people might say it means a different thing. So there needs to be some clear way of people who are evaluating these technologies to make sure everybody's on the same page about what they're talking about. And that's what we think the glossary can come in to help with evaluation. And so the way we've been developing it is to capture different views from across the network, inviting people to give their ideas about what they would consider core concepts or characteristics of the digital good. And then the aim is that this will also help inform the production of a commissioned card deck, so that people can use these terms within like the discussions that they're having. So it can be used within teams rather than just an individual activity researching the terms online. So as said, we've been collating this collection of terms with people across the network and beyond the network through a few different events. And so the pictures that you can see here, you probably can't read it, but the pictures symbolize different terms that people gave us during an event at our summit earlier in the year. And we've then taken all of these to collate a massive list of what people are saying are different digital society or digital good concepts. So some here, like around sovereignty, people should own the means of production, support for those wanting to be part of a digital society but are overwhelmed by tech and needing offline methods to gather support to overcome their barriers. And yeah, there's a few different terms like that. So from doing this process and getting loads of people to give us their thoughts about what they consider concepts for a good digital society, there needs to be more terms within the final glossary that include more emotion. People noted things like anger and joy and passion and all of these different emotive words to make it clearer about not just like the concepts itself, but the feelings and that around it. And there's terms that align with the target audience. So while these terms have come from a wide different range of perspectives, what terms within that fits with people within the context of people deploying or developing or procuring technology. So the inclusion of more technical terms within the glossary would help do this. And then terms that reflect all of the societal challenges that we've outlined. So terms might have fit more with equity, they might have fit more with collective well-being, but less terms appearing so far from like an initial list of terms focused around sustainability. So people wanted to see more things that linked in with sustainability. And also terms that embrace the complexity of good and what this means to different people. So as explained, good doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. Digital good doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. And so there's different ways we can do this to help embrace this complexity, such as the inclusion of non-Western terms and different perspectives of what the digital good could be. And then there was also things that people mentioned about different ways to cluster or categorize or indicate relationships between these concepts, and an explanation for why some of these similar terms might be included if they became part of the final curated glossary in the end. So while we focused so far on crowdsourcing the glossary, this has created a lot of terms quickly that can become hard to manage, but it does help to capture these views from across the network and ensure that that those different views are represented in the final glossary that is curated. And it also highlights where people have submitted terms, but there's different understandings of those terms. We can begin to see quickly where there's areas of tension or different understandings of these different terms. But for creating something that can then go online, hundreds and hundreds of terms would be like unmanageable and also just making it really, really hard to search through them. So there needs to be some way to curate these. And as such, from this, there's issues that can come up with this because it involves us interpreting what people mean, especially where these terms might be unfamiliar to us as curators. And so we need some decisions around transparency about how the decisions are made, about which terms to include, so who it's for, what terms are useful for those people, and how we ensure that these terms are accessible. So less jargon, making sure that they're in simple language that anybody can pick up the glossary and understand what we're talking about. And then we move on to the database for guidance, reviewing guidance and indices. So we started to create this database, and there's two main tabs within this database. The first looking at literature or overviews of existing guidance. So this is different reports, journal articles, things like that, that include the challenges and gaps with existing guidance and the different methods that might be used to evaluate ethical digital technology use. And then there's another tab that's around existing real-world guidance with examples of toolkits, standards, indices, playbooks, and we're going to go into that more in a little bit. But this is just to say that the intention of creating this database is that in the Digital Good Builder, we can point people towards relevant guidance, taking it from this database that exists. So the guidance includes a range of different things. So it includes frameworks, guides and guidelines, manifestos, principles, policies and standards, blueprints, case studies, catalogues, glossaries, libraries, observatories, records, and the list still keeps going. Action plans, reports, recommendations, card decks, impact and self-assessment tools, playbooks, toolkits, and also, as it's the Digital Good Index, index and indices. And so this just shows like the broad range of different ways that tools exist that people can interact with to understand different views, different guidance around ethical deployment of technologies. So in order to go through this database, we've created this framework to help evaluate what guidance will go into the database and what guidance might be taken out, as it might not be as relevant for the purposes that we intend to gather the guidance for. So there's some factors within this that we say must be in there in order for it to become part of the database, and other ones that are just nicer to have. So these essential factors is that it embodies the Digital Good Network values, as values underpin everything we do. It's important that the guidance that we're pointing people towards embodies those values as well. The guidance aligns with the purpose of the Digital Good Index, that it's an appropriate length for the intended audience, that it's accessible, that it's easy to navigate, that the format is appropriate for its intended purpose. So that might be like the card deck that we mentioned earlier. It's intended to be used in group settings. So if they said it was meant to be used by individuals, there'd have to be reasoning for that and for it to be included for that purpose. And then the guidance considers what level of context is needed in order to be useful. So just understanding like how long that it needs to be. So if it's really, really long, like a really long report, and it's intended to be used by policymakers, then it probably won't be read, and there needs to be some quicker way that they can read through that, but not devoid of all of that context that doesn't give the necessary information to engage with it successfully. And so it might be that the guidance also includes examples or makes it clear who the guidance is for, or provide some additional reading, or who was involved in creating the guidance, showing the motivations behind developing that guidance. But those things are less important in comparison to things like the DGM values and the purpose of it. And so I'm going to pass back to Dee for the blueprints, and then we'll go into a Q&A.
Great, thanks so much. So this is the final aspect, those case studies of the digital good, which are blueprints for a good digital society. And so we're really excited. This is funding that we've just allocated. We'll have 15 projects looking at different aspects of social life or societal institutions. And the format is that they'll write a report and a briefing, so a policy briefing or a briefing for industry, that will focus on a specific part of our lives, and make recommendations about what that aspect of our life would look like in a good digital society. So Kim, if you wanted to change the slide. Thanks. So for example, blueprints for a good digital death in a good digital society. So Eva Nito McAvoy at King's College London will be really investigating the elements around a digital death, and how we can tackle these challenges aligned with the values behind a good digital society. Another example you can see here is environmentally sustainable use of Gen AI in schools in a good digital society. Do you want to go to the next? So there's 15 of these, which will form sort of a suite of case studies for the digital good. So connected families. I'm sure we all have a lot of questions about that in our personal lives. Yeah, the next slide. For example, here, digital first museums and community hosted heritage initiatives. So a whole range of societal institutions covering different aspects of our daily lives. And we're hoping that anybody who's using the Digital Good Index to develop, deploy, or procure a digital technology, and we'll be able to look at these and see, okay, maybe there's something related to what I'm doing and lessons that can be learned. Great. So what's coming next for us? So what's coming next for us? This will just be a very quick run through of the actions relating to these 4 work streams. I'm not sure one slide can really summarize all the work we have on our plate, but here we go. For the Digital Good Builder, we're moving into this phase of writing up our co-design workshops, potentially doing some more co-design workshops with partners in order to hone the tool and create a version that will be self-serve on the website. If you know anybody who would be interested in working with us on a co-design workshop, someone who you think would benefit from working with us and evaluating the values behind their digital technologies, then please get in touch. I'll pop our email in the chat in a minute. Then for the work stream on the database of existing guidance and indices, we've got more reviewing of all this volumes of guidance that's out there. And the real aim of that is to take all of the great work that's out there that's gone into these guidance and indices, and find a way that it's more navigable for people. And again, we'll create that as a public database. The third work stream, the glossary and card deck, we're going to identify more core glossary terms, develop an online glossary, if we feel it's needed. If we feel that actually we can find out and direct people to other different glossaries, we might do that. But if we feel it's needed, we'll develop an online glossary and a card deck. And then the case studies work is already underway, as we've just allocated the funding for that, and the projects will start soon with publication probably around spring next year. Great. All right then. Well, we'll move on to our Q&A. Thank you all for your consideration and listening to us. Please use the Q&A function to ask any questions in Zoom. Don't use the chat if that's all right, because we won't see them. And we've got a couple of questions come in already. So maybe Kim, you could take this one. How does this account from an anonymous attendee? How does this account for for digital solutionalism? Not everything needs to be digitized just because it can be. Should the digital good also include room for no digital in line with the degrowth agenda? Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and yeah, it's something we have been considering, and some of the questions that people will be asked, like will be going through and reflecting on under some of the digital society measures does reflect on whether they should be using technology to do this or whether they should use a non-digital solution. We don't want to advocate that technology is the way forward and it should be used in every circumstance. We're acknowledging that that is not the case for a lot of different solutions to things. So yeah, I feel like that answers that. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Um, so there's a question here from Amanda Green. She says, many early stage tech founders and funders I work with profess to fully back these values, but will recite resource constraints to justify doing little at every stage of funding and company development. Does the index account for or map to different company development stages, e.g., size of organization, funding, revenue, or have a way to benchmark? I could take that one. Thanks, Amanda. That's really, really interesting. And we'd love to hear more about your work, actually. Please do get in touch with us because it sounds like you're working with a lot of people facing similar conundrums to the people we're talking to. Um, this is a self-reflective tool, so people are able, and we do see people sort of modulate and moderate what they're doing in line with the size of the organizations. And actually, this does tie into another question here, which says, um, who would use this framework and what incentive do they have to use it? Sorry, I'm summarizing that question, but at the moment, with how we're developing the Digital Good Index, we are sort of pushing at slightly open doors. So people who are already interested in how their digital technology can be designed in a in a values based way. We are working with people who have strong institutional values, corporate values, that are driving their digital technologies, and they might, for example, be worried about how digital technologies are aligning with their values. So we are sort of at this stage targeting people who are already worried about these things, but perhaps need a structured way to go through and evaluate and deliberate on their technologies. I think over time we'd hope for that to widen a little bit. So that's a really great point about these questions of sort of using resources as a reason to not be developing technologies in ways that are aligned with digital good values. Hope that answers your question. And yeah, please do get in touch with us. We'd be really interested to hear about your work. So there's another question here. If I've understood another anonymous attendee, if I've understood correctly, the tool is set to be used by companies that choose to deploy it to evaluate the impact of their new digital technologies, rather than a broader tool to evaluate some of the outcomes of existing digital technologies. Yes, that's right. As someone that is very concerned about the impact of existing digital technologies on people's well-being and mental health, I wish this tool could be used to evaluate common social media platforms, many of which I believe would not score highly on your values list, values 4, 6, and 9 in particular. Do you have any plans for your tool to be used more broadly to evaluate existing platforms? And what do you think about the challenge of evaluating these big existing technologies? Kim, do you want to take that?
Yeah, it's a big question, isn't it? I think we've chosen to not do that because we've chosen to start by engaging with people that have come to us and said that they want help and they need help as they are developing a new technology, instead of where these big technologies already exist, where it's already a massive challenge to try and evaluate whether they're good for society or not and whether they're willing to engage to begin with. And we decided as part of this that it was better that we end up enacting change in the ways that we can and feasibly can within this project, rather than going into situations where people might not necessarily listen as much. Do you have
And
anything
just
to add to that?
just
Yeah.
just to add to that, because now I've had a minute to process the question. It's not just for new digital technologies. It is for technologies that already exist. So when I was saying yes, that's correct, I was meaning more. It's not about it's about a what we're developing is a self-evaluation tool for people developing new technologies or procuring technologies that already exist or deploying technologies that already exist, rather than being a sort of look at the landscape of digital technologies out there and giving them a score and evaluating them. Um, so we're not, as you say, we're not doing that. We didn't feel we were best placed to do that, not least because the work and research that informs the Digital Good Network really highlights how a good digital society looks really different for all different kinds of people and different groups of people. So, for example, what might promote connection for one people is disconnecting for others, and what might bring some people joy doesn't bring others joy. Um, and so we didn't feel that it was right for us to sort of sit from the center and evaluate and give scores like that. What we're rather doing is trying to help people develop digital technologies in a way that's good for society, giving them real concrete steps to be able to do that in a values-based way. That being said, our big database of guidance and our big database of indices will map all of the existing work out there that's doing this. Um, and it's currently, a big database. And I remember one um, there is one index that evaluates social media platforms, isn't there, Kim?
I think there is, yeah.
So I'll try and dig, if Kim takes the next question, I'll try and dig that out and see if I can find it. Maybe just having a look at sort of a social media index. I do believe that exists, and where somebody sort of created a set of values or criteria for the social media platforms, and then gone through and allocated scores based on that. I hope that answers your question.
I think you've answered the other questions, Dee, that
Let's
are
have a
in the
look.
chat at the moment.
So yeah, if anyone has any more questions, please pop them in the chat. Now's the time. Oh yeah, there's this question here. Um, who would use this framework and what incentives do they have to use this? We answered that part, but it says since there are no boundaries around specific digital capabilities that are good or bad, how do you prevent this from being yet another way to non-digital commercialized non-digital environments? Um, and I think this sort of points to that greenwashing that we're very cautious of. And that's part of our work, sort of really digging into the literature about what does a good index or guidance look like? How does a good index work? And there's this real risk that, in creating a measure that becomes a benchmark, it stops being a useful measure. So we're really conscious of that. And that's one of the reasons that we've gone for this self-evaluative approach.
Yeah, I see this one here that says if it's a self-evaluation, I can speak. If it's a self-evaluation tool, what prevents a startup from rating themselves well for marketing purposes? Being a part of your network gives automatic legitimacy and falls into the child rights and digital rights trap where harmful technologies claim to be rights respecting. And I think that kind of feeds into what you were saying, Dee, in that we are developing it in a way that we don't want it to be like a checklist. We don't want it to be as simple as somebody can come through it and read it and go, okay, so we've done this, this, and this, so therefore we're doing good for society. It's about the more open-ended, broader questions, but also like specific to the values that we're discussing, that prevents people from just saying, yes, we're doing this, this, and this, and therefore we are good, but identifying what they are doing already and what they're not doing in order to start to work towards creating technologies that do have good societal benefits. Do you have anything to add to that, Dee?
No, that's right. Just to say, I've popped into the chat that social media index, but it's about their data transparency rather than anything more broadly. So that's there. So there's a question here. How does this translate into business requirements and actual technology development? I think that's a really good question. It's about sort of how is this digital good index that we're developing grounded in the actual work that people are doing. And that's why we have really drilled into this concept of actions that people can take. So we talk about values, we talk about the values that drive digital technologies. For me personally, it's been really interesting to see the values that people identify that are behind their well-intentioned good digital technological innovations that they're either developing, designing, or procuring. So yes, but what we're really doing is taking those sort of very high concepts and changing them into practical action. So an action might be, oh, okay, we need to invite this person to this stakeholder event. We need to make sure that we've worked with our SEN children group, or it might be, actually, we need to find out what is the environmental implication of that thing that we've just procured. How can we go about finding that out? So hopefully what we're doing is taking these like big concepts about not only really the concepts aren't just about what does a good digital society look like, it's what is a good what is a good society really, the massive questions that have challenged people for all time, but drilling them down into really sort of concrete actions and steps that people can take, and then come back to it and see what actions they've taken and how things have changed or how things might develop in the future. Let's have a look. I think we've got great question here. How do we get in touch with you about the project? So in a second, I'll pop into the chat our email address, but if you want to, so that's info@digitalgood.net. That's info@digitalgood.net. Or if you go onto our website, digitalgood.net, you'll find a chat box. You're really welcome to get in touch with us there through a sort of online form. And yes, we'd love to hear from you about if you have any ideas about how we can develop the index. I think there's another point to be made really, which is in summarizing some of these questions here, which is that we're not sort of claiming that this is going to make all digital technologies good, or that there's sort of, grand things that we're able to do. What we're doing is offering a mechanism for people who want to work towards good digital technologies. So anyone who's interested in progressing their digital technologies in line with the digital good, we're offering them a mechanism to do that, a way to sit down with their colleagues and reflect on the values underpinning the technologies and the steps that can be taken to deliver them. I'm not seeing any new questions in the question and answer box. Anybody got any last minute questions? Anybody got any questions? All right then. Well, Kim, could you just pop up that slide about our next webinar, please?
Give me a second.
So the next webinar in the series, I've just pasted in the chat the link to the page with all of our upcoming webinars. But our next one is Gender and the Digital Good, where we'll be exploring themes about gender in the research projects in our network. It'll be on the Wednesday, the 24th of June at 2 o'clock. And we have some great speakers there. So please do sign up. You can do so through the link in the chat. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Really would love for you to get in touch with us. And yeah, thank you so much for joining. We're excited to see where the work takes us next. Thank you.
Thank you.